Looks like everyone is going to have to wait just a little bit longer to see who's going to be the next head coach for the New Jersey Devils. And speaking of which, there might be another candidate available, but is he the right option? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliotte scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks Pitchforks, and also part-time credentialed media member, Trey Matthews. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the frenzy surrounding the next head coach for the New Jersey Devils. I know, shocker. It feels as though I have discussed more head coach candidates than I've discussed players that could potentially join the Devils this offseason, with the exception of Brady Tkachuk, but we know that's not going to happen, at least not this offseason. All right, in today's episode, we do have an update because it was recently reported that the Devils should be announcing their next head coach soon. However, Elliotte Friedman says pump the brakes on that, and we'll talk more on that in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we'll discuss a wild card candidate, in my opinion, for the Devils, which is Todd McLellan, who was recently the head coach for the LA Kings, but we know how that tenure ended. And then the third and final segment, I will talk about this Devils team moving forward, because regardless of who's behind the bench, obviously I have my personal preferences. This Devils team is going to be just fine because I think they are destined for a lot of great things, and had certain aspects gone their way this season, I'd say they'd be in the playoffs competing for the cup. Would they win it? Probably not, but I think that it's still good to get your name into that running. But anyway, let's talk about this update surrounding the next head coach for the Devils. All right, a little over a week ago, Pierre LeBrun said that the Devils should name their next head coach within the next 7 to 10 days. Well, when this episode goes live, that report was 9 days ago. So we're closing in on the 10-day mark. And still nothing, not even a lead saying like it seems like the Devils are inching closer to this coach and they just need to work out the final details of a contract. Courtesy of our buddy, James Nichols over at New Jersey Hockey Now, he included some quotes from Elliotte Friedman on a recent episode of 32 Thoughts. I will leave a link to James's latest article in the description if you want to hear his thoughts on the matter. Here's what Friedman had to say, quote, "Devils fans, I'm sorry to put you through a bit of a roller coaster here. I've had a couple of occasions where people have kind of thought it was close, but a couple sources who I think are really smart say don't jump to any conclusions yet." Friedman continued to say, "There was a time I thought Berube was the lead candidate. There was a time I thought Woodcroft was the lead candidate. I know they've shown interest in McLellan, and I think there was also a time when I thought Keith was the lead candidate. To give you some ideas out there, at different times in the last 24 to 48 hours, people who I think are pretty plugged in have said, chase this guy or chase that guy. That's the guy." Friedman concluded to say, "Devils are definitely keeping people guessing. I just think one of the things with Keith, who I definitely think is a contender here, people are asking, does he really want to coach right now? And I think we're still kind of waiting on that answer." So that's what I would say. I know for the Devils fans, it's not clear as you would like it to be, but I don't want to make anything up, at least not today. Here are my thoughts on the matter. I think it's smart for the Devils to be taking their time here because I know they have a few candidates out there, but look on the bright side. None of those candidates have been picked up. The only potential candidate that was swooped up was Travis Green, but even then, I don't think he was the realistic next head coach for the Devils. And the Devils do have options here, and they can't really go wrong with any of the potential selections, with the exception of one. the Devils need to be patient because you need to pick a coach that can help take this team to the next level. All right, they've already been to the playoffs. They know what it takes to get there. They're no longer the underdog team. They're no longer going to be facing a team's backup goalie. The mindset that some teams might have used to have was like, where did this team come from? I didn't expect that from them. They just caught lightning in a bottle. They're punching above their weight class. That narrative is now over. And now it's a matter of time before the Devils really shapeshift their roster, because I do anticipate for Tom Fitzgerald to try to fix some of the issues for New Jersey. Here are some things that the Devils need, with the exception of a new head coach: grittier defense and a better goalie option in front of Jake Allen. And I think Tom Fitzgerald is going to get to work on that. And they do have some assets to play with, including their 10th overall selection in this year's NHL draft. And they did sign Seamus Casey to an entry-level deal. Here's the thing. There's a logjam of good defensemen in front of them. Would Seamus Casey be given a chance? I just want to put that out there. The point I'm just trying to make is that the Devils do have some options. And whether it's trying to shapeshift the roster or finding who's going to be behind the bench leading the way, this Devils team has a lot of potential. And we'll talk more about that in the third segment. But basically, it's just like you really need to find the right candidate to take them to the next level, because I think Lindy Ruff did a decent job developing the core in Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and then Timo Meier was added to the mix. I think he did a decent job at that. Now it's like, how can they transform that into becoming a title contender? Some things are going to have to change in terms of roster personnel, but it also comes down to who's leading the way. And here are my preferences, and this is based on all the coaches I've talked about so far, and these are potential candidates that the Devils have their eyes set on. My first choice is still Craig Berube, past Stanley Cup champion, not afraid to tell it how it is. I know people have this notion that players didn't like playing under him, but just talk to Jake Allen if you're unsure. Then Sheldon Keefe, because while the Maple Leafs still struggled to get out of the first round, something you cannot deny is that they had 3 straight seasons of 100-plus points. They were always top in expected goals for. And not only that, I think the core 4 developed nicely under Keefe, and they did something that they had not done since 2004, advance to the second round of the playoffs. And Sheldon Keefe also did something amazing without one of his star players. And we'll talk more about that in the second segment because it relates to Todd McLellan, and we'll get to him momentarily. Jay Woodcroft, he had a few decent seasons with the Oilers, and they did make it to the Western Conference Finals at one point, and he does have experience coaching star players similar to Keefe. And then a couple wildcard options are Mike Sullivan, but does that mean Sheldon Keefe goes to the Penguins and then Mike Sullivan is available? Would he want an interview with the Devils? A lot would have to happen, which is why I don't think Mike Sullivan is realistic. Still could happen, but a lot of dominoes are going to have to fall in order for him to land in New Jersey. And then a coach I did not really want to talk about, but since he is a potential candidate, Todd McLellan, who recently coached the LA Kings. And that's what we're going to talk about in the second segment. But before we continue, let me tell you about Policygenius. And I think it's safe to say life insurance is an important safety net for your family, but trying to find the right policy on your own can be time-consuming and overwhelming. Have you ever experienced that? Well, let me tell you about Policygenius. Policygenius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step. Easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Your work life insurance may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. Okay, let's talk about Todd McLellan. Future head coach for the Devils? Question mark. Like I've been doing in my prior episodes, we'll look at my personal criteria if you need a reminder. How can they handle star players? Experience. Can their system work in the modern NHL? And do they have championship experience, which is hard to come by, but I still take it into consideration. Here's the thing. McLellan has a lot of experience, but I would say it's mostly been a lot of heartbreak. He was a longtime coach for the San Jose Sharks, the Edmonton Oilers, and the LA Kings. I know we think of the San Jose Sharks being a bottom tier team for right now, but once upon a time, when they had Joe Thornton, when they had Patrick Marleau, they were a perennial playoff team, and at the helm of it was McLellan. But here's the thing. I hope you guys start to see a pattern because I'm going to make a point of this a little later in this segment. 2009, lost in the conference quarterfinals to Anaheim. 2010, lost in the conference finals to Chicago. 2011, lost in the conference finals to Vancouver. 2012, lost in the conference quarterfinals to St. Louis. 2013, lost in the conference semifinals to the LA Kings. And speaking of which, this is probably the most heartbreaking one. 2014, lost in the first round to the LA Kings, back-to-back seasons in which they were bounced out of the playoffs by LA, and they had a 3-0 lead. No, not the Kings. The Sharks had a 3-0 lead, and they blew it. That is a rarity across all the major sports in North America, blowing a 3-0 lead. And I remember talking to Chico Resch about this because he was a part of an Islanders team that overcame a 3-0 deficit, and usually the odds are stacked heavily against you. And if you do blow a 3-0 lead, no one's going to let you hear the end of it. After his stint in San Jose, he was a head coach for Edmonton from 2015 to 2018. And in his 3.5 seasons there, they only made the playoffs once, and they lost in the second round to Anaheim in 2017. Then in his more recent tenure with the LA Kings, they made the playoffs twice when he was at the helm, and they lost in the first round both times to Edmonton. And faith have it, they lost to Edmonton yet again in this year's playoffs. But obviously, McLellan was not there. And his firing a little more than halfway through the season was met with some controversy because the Kings were supposed to be title contenders heading into the season, and they kicked off the year with 11 straight road wins, which was an NHL record. But shortly before he was fired, the Kings had lost 14 of their last 17 games, which means something had to change quickly. And it's just so crazy that the Kings got off to a very good start and they fizzled out to the point where McLellan had to be given the boot. All right, so he does have experience. How does he handle star players? That's my biggest concern because when he was with San Jose, he had some star players. I think he's one of the reasons why Patrick Marleau does not have a ring. I think it's safe to say that Marleau is the greatest player to ever play for the San Jose Sharks, and he does not have a Stanley Cup to his resume. I'm sure he tosses and turns because the Sharks, they had their chances. Unfortunately, they always fell short. Then in Edmonton, you had one of the greatest players of all time, and I think it's safe for me to say that, and you only made the playoffs one time. And then in LA, didn't really work out, and you were always bounced out by your former team, the Oilers. If he's given Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, are they really going to make an ounce of difference if we're being completely honest? And a lot of people are wondering, what is wrong with McLellan? Well, to put it short and simple, he doesn't make changes. That's the biggest issue. And here's a snippet from the LA Times when they were discussing his firing. They said McLellan couldn't achieve the singular postseason success that he had eluded in San Jose and Edmonton. I wouldn't say it's a success just because like they always stay stagnant, but he was working with flawed rosters much of the time. He gave the Kings a second defense-based structure and was patient while Quentin Byfield developed into a legitimate top six forward. Probably his biggest weakness was his inability to adjust after opposing teams developed a quote-unquote book on the Kings and they became too predictable and too easy to pick apart. All right, this is the main concern I have, which is, yes, the Kings were still a good offensive team. They were a good defensive team. And I think some people brought up to the fact that their goaltending was probably an issue. And I'm not a fan of McLellan's system in terms of winning championships because when you get to the playoffs, it's a different animal. You got to win 4 times out of 7, and you got to know how to be adaptable. Remember what I alluded to in the first segment in terms of what Sheldon Keefe was able to do? Yes, Austin Matthews ended up returning in the series, but the Maple Leafs still made a comeback without one of their star players. In fact, their best goal getter in Austin Matthews, and yet they still found a way to make sure that they were not eliminated in 5 games. In fact, they forced it to a game 7. That's called being adaptable, and that's trying to get everyone involved. Or look at what the Oilers did in round 1 against the Kings this time around in the playoffs for the 3rd straight year. Everyone got involved. It wasn't just the Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl show. No, they got other players into the works. Is Stuart Skinner the go-to guy in net? No. Let's be completely honest. But I think in the round against LA, it's just like the main complaint that people had with the Oilers is that they don't have enough depth assets in order to compete. And they showcase how they could be a complete team. How will this series against the Canucks go? We don't really know. It's been very hectic. But for the most part, they're not out of it. That's the thing, which is how can you be adaptable? And the fact that you don't really make changes, you don't make changes to your lines, it just leaves me very concerned. I think out of all the coaching candidates I've talked about on this show, I think McLellan is my least favorite. And I think the Devils should steer far away from him because it didn't work in San Jose. It didn't work in Edmonton. It didn't work in LA. And I don't think it's going to work in New Jersey. I just don't like his system in terms of winning championships. I think the Devils will be a great regular season team under McLellan. Their defense and their offense, it will improve. Their offense didn't really need much improvement, but their defense, I think, will take a few steps forward. But in terms of winning 4 times out of 7, I think they're going to be picked apart, similar to what the LA Times was talking about when breaking down the firing of McLellan. That's just my personal opinion. All right, handling star players. He's had star players in the past and didn't really win a Stanley Cup out of them. Experience, yeah, he's been in the league for a while, but it's still just not much success in my eyes and more heartbreak and disappointment. Modern NHL, great for regular season, not good for playoffs. Championship, no Stanley Cup. I think Berube, Keefe, maybe Woodcroft should be the go-to candidates for the Devils. And if Mike Sullivan does become available, then he shoots to the top on my list. All right, to close out today's episode, I will talk about how the team will go moving forward. But before we continue, let me tell you about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Please remember to gamble responsibly. All right, to make this short, I know it's been a frenzy. I know it's been crazy. It's been frantic. It's been a ruckus in terms of trying to figure out who the next head coach is going to be. And it seems like we're going to have to wait a little bit longer before we realize who's going to be behind the bench for the Devils. But make no mistake, similar to what I alluded to in segment 1, this Devils team is going to be okay, in my opinion. I think they are destined for a lot of great things. They have a great young core, and now it's just a matter of, can we get that stability in terms of leadership? And I think whoever is going to become the next head coach for the Devils, I think Tom Fitzgerald knows what he's doing, and that's going to be the first domino piece to fall. Get a good head coach who has that past experience of working with superstar players or winning a Stanley Cup. That's going to go a long way. But at the same time, the Devils still have the same product. It's just a matter of how are those products going to be utilized on the rink. That's all I want to say to you guys, which is the Devils will be just fine. And I have the utmost faith in Fitzgerald that he's going to make the right decision in terms of naming the head coach. And he should take his time with this, because you got to meticulously see who's going to be your guy for the next few years. I'm tired of changing in the front office, changing the head coach. I'm sick of it. We're done with the rebuild. It's time to move on. That's my personal opinion, which is why I don't think Fitzgerald should be fired. I think everybody amongst the Devils discourse should believe in Fitzgerald. And yes, there was a lot of flaws and missed shots and opportunities with the Devils this past season, but I think Fitzgerald has learned and he's going to try to fix it. That's my thing. Just have faith in the process. Whoever's the next head coach for the Devils, I think it's going to be just fine. But let me know what you guys think. Who's your top coach candidate for the Devils, and how do you think this team is going to function moving forward? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.